Good afternoon, everyone. Everyone can hear me, right? And Adriana, you let me know if the Zoom is already open. Yeah. Okay. So we're going to start. I suppose that some people might be arriving late, as it's always the case, but we don't want to delay anymore. My name is Anna Zobnina. I am the coordinator of the European Network of Migrant Women. And in today's event, my role will be very technical. I will be doing the minutes and the introduction of the speakers. But I want to say a big thank you, of course, to everyone who is in this room today with us physically and also online. And I will just give a few technical details before I pass the floor to our speakers. First of all, we're going to have a little break. So what you see on the program, somewhere in the middle of the program, we're going to have a very short coffee break. And then after we finish the event and all the presentations, we're going to have Q&A. We have half an hour for a good discussion, and then also about half an hour for reception and exchange in a more informal way. For those who are on Zoom, there is a French interpretation, so I suppose that by now everybody is confident in using Zoom, but there is one little button at the top of the screen where you press and you go into a French channel. I would like to remind all the speakers to be mindful of time, and I will be reminding you as well, but also not to speak very fast because you will be interpreted simultaneously into French. So with this, my role is over, and I'm going to pass the floor to Susanna Pavlou, who is speaking to us and with us from Cyprus. She is the director of the Mediterranean Institute of Gender Studies. It's the organization that is coordinator of this very project, whose policy brief you found on the seats, and that actually this event partly is dedicated to the completion of this project, apart from the fact, of course, that today is a EU Anti-Trafficking Day. So please, Susanna, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Anna. I'm sorry I could not be with you today in person. I'm absolutely delighted to be opening this event. I'd like to warmly welcome everyone, although I cannot see you from my screen, to this event that marks EU Day Against Trafficking in Human Beings, COALESCE, supporting migrant women victims of sex trafficking in Europe, that is organized within the framework of the EU-funded project, also of the name COALESCE, which aims at providing comprehensive psychosocial support to female migrant victims of trafficking for sexual exploitation in Europe. This event brings together, and we thank everyone for putting it, who worked to put this event together, international experts of our COALESCE project, along with survivors, to share the outcomes and results. The COALESCE project is based on the recognition and understanding that trafficking is a gender-specific crime and is inextricably linked to gender inequality and unequal power relations between women and men. Women and girls don't only constitute the majority of victims of trafficking for sexual exploitation, but also experience gender-specific consequences from the trafficking experience, which are severe, long-term, physical, sexual, reproductive, as well as mental health harms and traumas. We also recognize that integration programs for third country nationals are not fit for purpose for women victims of trafficking. They often don't take into account their lived experience, the intersecting factors contributing to their disadvantage, exclusion, and vulnerability, and do not empower women to reach their full potential. The COALESCE project proposes a model that we believe is fit for purpose. And we're delighted to have with us today representatives from our partners from across Europe that in collaboration developed the GESIM model for strengthening specialist victim support services in providing precisely this type of specialized gender-specific provision for female victims of trafficking. You'll have the opportunity to hear from them during our roundtable discussion that is going to be led by our leading anti-trafficking expert, Gunilla Ekberg, that we thank warmly for providing her insight, experience, and feminism to this project and working alongside us. We're also honored to have with us today key experts in the area that will provide insights on the issue of sex trafficking from unique and diverse perspectives. Drisha Fernandez, Dr. Jennifer Okeke, and Blessing Okidion, thank you so much for being with us today. I'd also like to take this opportunity to thank our funders. The COALESCE project is co-financed. Hosts, of course, the European Network of Migrant Women for making this event possible. I wish you a really interesting and fruitful event, and I will be watching. You remotely. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Susanna. Thank you for wishing us luck. I will immediately pass the floor to the second presenter, who is Chiara Paralin. And Chiara is our newly elected co-president in our network, European Network of Migrant Women.
Thank you, Anna. Good evening. I want to start saying that in Western Europe, between 1 and 2 million people sell their body, and mostly are migrant women. 67% of identified victims of trafficking are victims of sexual exploitation. We can say that trafficking in person for the purpose of sexual exploitation in Europe and globally is a gender-specific phenomenon because, as I have already said, the absolute majority of victims are women. Clients buy services from foreign trafficked prostitute women, and they are aware of it. I say it today and I repeat it on every occasion. Prostitution and trafficking are not two distinct issues, are not two distinct phenomena, but are intimately connected. And the remedy is only one: to sanction the customer. Because men who pay a woman make a clear choice. They don't respond to an uncontrollable sexual urge. And for this reason, the only concrete tool that we have to eliminate the sexual exploitation of women is the introduction of the Nordic model. Trafficking is fought only by reducing demand at its roots, because the demand for sexual services is one of the push factors of the sex trade. To deny this evidence means to legitimize the power of the patriarchy that dominates our society.
Thank you, Chiara. Maybe I will use my privilege as a moderator just to add that I think the question of the root causes of trafficking in women for sexual exploitation in Europe, but globally as well, is actually it informs our understanding of service provision as well. And of course, while this project itself, the main focus and the main concern is the victims of this very serious crime, in the end of the day, the question that we're all asking ourselves, will we improve the services that will help more victims, or will we ultimately stop the trade that generates the victims? And this is also something for us to bear in mind as we go through this discussion and listen to the presenters. And with this, I'm going to pass the floor to Christina Kaili, who is a senior researcher from the Mediterranean Institute of Gender Studies, again, the coordinator of the project, and she will tell us about the main results and findings and key issues of COALESCE.
Thank you very much. Is it on? Okay. Can we share the presentation? Hello, everyone, and welcome, and thank you for joining our event. and project. I will start in very few minutes. Excellent. All right. Okay. As our director at the Mediterranean Institute of Gender Studies, Susanna Pavlou, very well explained the rationale behind the inception of the COALESCE project. It's a consortium of a group of feminist organizations coming from diverse geographical backgrounds and very active in anti-trafficking work. They are experts in civil society networks and also in anti-trafficking work, ranging from frontline work with women affected by trafficking for sexual exploitation, evidence-based research, training, and policy advocacy. As Anna Zobnina mentioned, this is the final months of our project, and the aim of the project is to provide gender-specific psychosocial, legal, and economic support to third country national women victims of trafficking for sexual exploitation. Our aim was to join forces in terms of methodologies that we all implement in our countries that put women at the center, but at the same time to develop synergies and complementarities and improve transnational cooperation to find solutions that are based on women's needs and voices. So the key objective, the first key objective of our project was to provide assistance, which is guided by a gender-specific integration model that touches upon the 3 pillars of psychosocial, legal, and economic empowerment. The second key objective was to develop a practical toolkit enhanced by the input by actually reaching out to women and informed by a needs analysis. And the third objective was to promote national and transnational knowledge exchange, because we identified that professionals from different countries don't always have the opportunity to exchange methodologies, to discuss trends and barriers in providing support to women. And lastly, to improve the capacity not only of the organizations providing victim support across Europe, but also to provide tailor-made integration models that can be also replicable and used elsewhere. The project was designed and its inception started before COVID, but unfortunately we had to work and implement this project during COVID. So that's a snapshot from our very first kickoff meeting done online, with a lot of excitement, but also mixed feelings that we could not be together. And I will, it will be a great omission if I don't say a few words about our partnership of 9 members. The Mediterranean Institute of Gender Studies, which is leading this consortium, has been working on trafficking in women for sexual and labor exploitation since 2006. And our activities have had a high impact on policy formulation and legislation at the national level. The Cyprus Refugee Council, which strives to safeguard, support, and advocate for the rights of vulnerable groups in Cyprus, promoting the integration of refugees, asylum seekers, detainees, trafficking victims, and survivors of torture. Caritas Cyprus, which responds to humanitarian needs of migrant and refugees on the island, including victims of trafficking, women victims of trafficking through local grassroots initiatives, as well as island-wide programs that focus on migrants, local community, and youth volunteering. Of course, our hosts today, the European Network of Migrant Women, which is the only European organization which directly represents the voices of migrant and refugee women and has extensive experience campaigning at the European level. Then we move on to Solvoti, our German partner, who has extensive experience working with female third country national victims of trafficking for sexual exploitation, offering legal assistance, counseling, information, and integration support. Our Irish partners, the Immigrant Council of Ireland, that provides pro bono legal aid to vulnerable migrants with a particular focus on offering comprehensive gender-specific protection and integration and support to trafficked migrant women. Our Italian partners, Irocco, Associazione Irocco, who is a multicultural NGO in Italy, with over 20 years of experience in supporting victims of trafficking by providing direct services and campaigning locally and internationally against trafficking and sexual exploitation. Of course, our association Marta Center is the leading, our colleagues from Latvia is the leading organization advocating for women's rights, providing frontline services to victims of trafficking. And last but not least, Klaipėda Social and Psychological Service Center in Lithuania that provides a complex health, social, psychological, and legal support for victims of violence, domestic violence, intimate partner violence, trafficking in human beings, and sexual exploitation for prostitution purposes. The key target groups of our project are professionals working in the field of anti-trafficking work, trafficking in human beings, victim protection and asylum, women third country national victims of trafficking in human beings for sexual exploitation, and of course, victim support organizations across Europe. Policymakers and relevant stakeholders at the EU level are responsible for EU anti-trafficking, migration, and integration policy. I will give an overview of our key outcomes of this project. As I said before, each work package of our project was building on another in order to achieve our objectives. So we really wanted, first of all, to hear the women and their needs. Therefore, the first step of our work was to do a comprehensive needs analysis. And the colleagues who are providing the frontline support to women, despite COVID and lockdown, were able to manage to arrange interviews with 32 women from 6 countries to actually feed in their feedback, their needs, the gaps in the systems that they identify in order to inform our needs analysis reports and move on to the development of the integration model at the JESI. The reports are all available on the partners' websites, of course, and in the relevant languages of the countries. Then we moved on to creating the methodology of our tool, the gender-specific integration model. The work package was led by our partners in Ireland, ICI, with the support of Irocco Italy and Solvoti in Germany. And the methodology we used to gather all the methodologies used in the 3 pillars of intervention of our work, the psychosocial and legal support, and of course the economic empowerment, was to create templates and to feed in from our context-specific expertise to feed into creating this holistic toolkit and guidebook for practitioners in the field. It is also available in all languages, in 6 languages. Moving on, we wanted to implement this support In total, 116 women received integration assistance in total in the 6 countries, in a diversity of methodologies, ranging from individual support, counseling support, but also psychosocial and psychoeducational group sessions about these issues, and of course, group work for the economic empowerment. These sessions included CV writing, comprehensive sexuality education, sex education, contraception, consent, mental health, sleep hygiene, and many more subjects. And of course, in order to evaluate our impact and the key lessons deriving from testing this model and implementing this model are featured in 4 evaluation reports. I should note here that due to the specificities of the AMIF call that funded this project, our counterparts in Latvia and Lithuania were not in a position to implement the model, but they acted as peer reviewers for the development of this material. And of course, having the knowledge now in 2 years, especially after the pandemic, but also the Ukrainian war, it's in our intentions for the future to find ways to also implement these activities, not only for third country national women, but also for other victims in our countries. Two minutes, yes. After evaluating our intervention, which again, our main focus and reflection as professionals was how do we ensure that these voices and women's needs are reflected in our advocacy work, but also in our dissemination work. Therefore, we agreed to, first of all, we needed also the space as professionals to discuss these experiences in providing this support, which is often not available to us when we implement some projects. Therefore, we created a methodology where 3 roundtable discussions among professionals and local and European stakeholders took place. Sadly, due to the COVID pandemic, we had 2 online visual exchanges with professionals, and the last one was in Dublin last May, face-to-face. Where we discussed the implementation of the GESIM, the key lessons from the GESIM, and the possibilities for future replicating and expanding this tool. Yes. These are some photos, some photos from Dublin and the stakeholders in Dublin. And of course, with regards to our communication efforts, we made sure that these virtual discussions were available also online in order to inform also colleagues from other countries or colleagues who could not join us. Then, in terms of women's voices, but also informing our advocacy action, we had 2 elements. The one was creating blog posts of narratives of women sharing the stories who are beneficiaries of the project, but also of our frontline colleagues. We found this a very useful tool because in this way, we make these stories, but also navigating this system, which is very often very complex, as in the case of Cyprus, but elsewhere as well, to make it visible to our followers, to our policymakers, and to our societies. And of course, we now have a 3rd blog post which we are launching today through our social media, and accompanying these stories with our policy briefs. So the first policy brief, which was launched last year on this day, was focusing on the results of the needs assessment. And we will very soon share the second policy brief, which we will be focused on the lessons learned from implementing this tool. Okay, I'm almost over. These are some examples of how we communicated narratives and quotes from our beneficiaries. And last but not least, one thing I would like us to take from this meeting is that together with the support of our external evaluator, Gunilla Ekberg, we were able to reflect on these lessons and discuss how these interventions, holistic interventions, looking to bring a holistic approach in our interventions with survivors and victims is actually informing. So we have developed our own theory of social change, starting from concrete, holistic social and policy interventions to transform and bring meaningful change to women's lives, using critical feminist analysis, creating collaborative projects that have transnational and, if I may say so, global perspective, how the local informs the global as well, and engagement of beneficiaries in as many as possible in all stages of these interventions, stakeholders and institutions. And of course, leading to critical investigation of the social and policy implications of social interventions. And of course, this circle is also a constant process, a constant reflection process. And I think only in this way we can be accountable to ourselves, to our beneficiaries, and to our funders. Thank you very much. And thank you for your patience.
Thank you, Christina. We will have, of course, opportunity to discuss more about the practical details of implementation of JESIM model at the roundtable discussion in the second part of this event. And now I'm going to invite one of our invited speakers, external experts. We have Drisha Fernandez with us, who is speaking from Colombia. We decided that it was not very fair to fly Drisha all the way from Colombia for a 20 minutes presentation, but we also thought her expertise is particularly relevant to this project that deals with female migrant, or let's say women who have a nationality of another country, who were trafficked on the territory of another state for the purposes of sexual exploitation. And of course, we know that Latin America in general, but specifically Venezuela, for example, is one of the countries that is affected by war for a long time. And this is something that is quite close to home right now in Europe. And we thought it would be relevant to give a floor to an expert who could inform us about their work in Colombia, specifically with female victims of trafficking. Drisha, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for the invitation, Anna, and the whole team. We've been partners for a while. I hope my presentation is not full of too much information. I won't give everything, but I will leave the presentation for all of you to use later if you think it's useful. Okay, so I was asked to speak about comprehensive support to victims of trafficking. This is a project that we've been working on for the last 2 years. And we set up a shelter for Venezuelan women in Colombia. I want to give you a bit of the context. We are a network of activist survivors and organizations that have been working for years against sexual exploitation in Colombia. We designed, as you did, a project during pandemic to help the women leave the red light districts because they were in terrible conditions. 8 to 10 women living in one room with 2 beds. And we added the expertise, charisma of several activists to maximize the impact on women's lives. The idea is not to set up a shelter on its own. It's to set up a program that can be exported to other shelters to see how effective we can be in helping women exit prostitution. The first step is having a clear framework. And of course, international human rights law is the way for us. And these three conventions are the most important for us, defining the three main actors: pimps, traffickers, the demand, and the offer. And for us, it is clear, of course, that international human rights law understands that this is in sex-based, oh, sorry, now my computer is not working, is sex-based discrimination, consent of the victim is irrelevant, and we have crimes that were basically designed to prevent the exploitation from happening, which is trafficking in persons. And it's also clear for us in the last recommendations of CEDAW that this is violence against women and it amounts to torture and slavery. These are very important and key concepts. Feminist perspective is key to us, as it is to you, analyzing unequal power subordination and how pimps are making money of women, abolishing a system that oppresses and subordinates women, promoting emancipation of women through special measures to achieve substantive equality is key for us. And we think this is the formula to achieve exercise and recognition of women's human rights. The failures we have found are basically, there are no results in relation to a criminal perspective. Working from the viewpoint of trafficking has not helped us to end trafficking. Palermo is here from year 2000, the UN Convention from 1949, and this is a huge problem worldwide. It is not really helping. Poor results with exit programs, we believe they're not based on complex trauma. Women go backslide into prostitution, unfortunately, and there is poor work on the structural causes for trafficking. This is such a big issue. Governments are really not interested in working on all the different aspects. Immediate results are given by the abolitionist legislation, as you have proposed at the beginning of this conference. Pimps have to find other markets. Women have to find ways to generate income. This happened during pandemic. Many women didn't have the demand, so they had to find other options, although some went online, unfortunately. And we have a clear understanding that pornography is prostitution, is trafficking, and we need to include that in this type of legislation. It is key. The second key thing is to understand the context. We want to tell you, Anna told you about our armed conflict for 60 years, how women have been displaced and warlords have changed weapons for trafficking in women. They use the same drug trafficking routes. So you know that this is a very important and organized criminal industry. This is not like the little pimp in a corner. Military, police, and officers, public officers, participate and facilitate the trafficking in women, which makes it even more complex. And new models, business models, are being naturalized. We have the Venezuelan issue, which makes our context even more complicated. 120-year-old oil and mining industry economic base. Prostitution is very connected to mining industry. And then all this money has gone into subsidies for people. We have mining paramilitaries who are now organized crime groups in the frontier. And they do everything from drugs, weapons, women, to food, medicine, etc. And of course, we have a cultural grooming of women in Venezuela, which has gone on for decades around beauty contests and their male-centered customs. The estimates are that we have 1 million women in prostitution only in Colombia, 150,000 on webcam. This is information given by the sex industry during pandemic, and I'm pretty sure they are right. There are multiple barriers for women, and these, I'm sure all of you find the same in Europe. They are recruited online, they are raped, they are used as drug and weapon carriers, their families pressure them, pimps are their partners are pimps. And the pimp system, the whole prostitutional system, offers these women what government has not offered them. It gives them security, it gives them money, it gives them housing, it gives them food, etc., all based on a debt system. But they have this concept that they have this certain protection. Many of these women come from a continuum of violence, and they also fear that their children will be taken away. And of course, they lack the knowledge on our territory, prices, currency, and rights. One of the challenges we had is building a team. You need experience on violence against women. You need multidisciplinary teams, which is also very complex. We had specific issues with lawyers and doctors who have a real challenge in working with other disciplines. Knowledge and creativity, using new intervention techniques. It is never enough. We can tell you that complex trauma is so difficult to work with that any kind of technique must be tried out. Tolerance towards frustration, conflict resolution, being flexible but non-authoritative, that's important. Teaming up with survivors has been a key issue for us in all the phases of our work. And it is very important to understand you are re-educating many of these women. They never had the opportunity of being a child. They were raped when they were children. They took a lot of responsibilities for being women. And now, they need to experience that and then also experience what it is to be a mother. They didn't have the protection of their mother. Most probably, they don't know how to do it with their children. Understanding their survival methods is very important. The way they have learned to manipulate information and relationships, disloyal competition, self-sabotage, and assuming the role of the exploiter with other women. This is very common among women, and we need to understand this as survival, not as something that is innate to them. Also working at night, crisis management, suicide attempts, child abuse, and fights in the shelter itself. We have also found some other barriers in the advance of the program: poor nutrition and eating habits, specifically of the Venezuelan women. They've been eating too much starch, few vegetables, proteins, and fruit, severe physical and mental health, auto-sabotage of their process, as I said before. And we have realized complex trauma is a lifelong disorder. You can learn to manage it, but never heal completely. Also, no vision of their future. When you are in a mining and oil economy and you get everything is subsidized, you don't need to think of the future. Everything is given to you. So, with our shelter, it was more or less, they had the right to it. And there was no real work in what they wanted to do with their lives, but go back to Venezuela to continue receiving from their government. And also, of course, being part of criminal networks with their family. Even if they exit prostitution, it is difficult to exit the criminal networks in which they have been part of and their families are part of. Unfortunately, we were not able to transform the emotional ties they have to men. Many of them are their pimps. That's a long-term job. So the third key issue for us is diagnosing the depth of the harm. And this is a work done by a university faculty of medicine. And as you can see, they have so many different issues. In psychology and psychiatry, post-traumatic stress disorder is huge. Anxiety disorders. You can see every woman has at least 3 or 4 disorders. So this can give you the size of the problem. And their children also have a lot of different issues, inherited trauma, but they seem to heal faster. This is what was interesting in the experience. The fourth issue was setting up this intensive comprehensive program. Intensive is we did an 8-month program, but we think 6 months is enough. It's a full-time program, like a university kind of thing. And we have 4 components: adapting, empowering, restoring, and emancipating. And what we evaluate in these 4 components, which happen in a parallel way, is how they change the habits that they acquired in the prostitutional system, how they live together with other women and children. There are 10 women, more or less, and 17 children. There are lots of children. Physical and health improvement, mental and emotional health improvement, awareness of the prostitutional system and being victims of violence against women, care and protection of their children, preparing them for school. Many of them have never been to school. And of course, economic empowerment, as you call it, which is a better term than the one I'm using here. This is just to show you we have specific indicators, and all the teachers, we have 10 teachers in different areas that go from arts, reflexology, yoga, agriculture. This is in nature, this is set in nature. Agriculture has become a very key issue for them in anxiousness, managing anxiousness, and learning how life has a process and you need to have the same in your life. But we have many other things we offer, and these are all the different indicators that we use to see if there is a change in them. And all the teachers have case management around both women and their children, awareness of the prostitution system. I mean, you can see more or less the different things that we work on and evaluate periodically. What we offer a basic health route with doctors and physicians, psychiatrists, healthy nutrition. They learn to cook. They learn to cultivate and use this in their work. Psychosensory techniques have been key to our work in trauma, havening, tapping, and reflexology, and non-specific techniques like yoga, biodance, nature, and theater. And then you can see, agriculture, a barter system in which they learn to support each other. Not everything is in money. There's a whole program on money management, parenting guidelines, nature experiences, having fun. This is something they don't know how to have fun in a natural way. And then, of course, working for their own papers. We created a program in which they don't depend on others. There's no money in Colombia. This is not like wealthy governments in Europe. Here, they have to do things on their own. They will have to fight for their own rights. So what we do is we focus on giving them tools that they can use for themselves and to improve their lives in Colombia. The lessons learned very quickly, articulating with organizations, we had to rescue the women. Even if we offered a lot in our program, we had to rescue them. This means women are not free. And we went through serious security issues in order to rescue them. During the program, we had to create a whole new program for children, which is a huge challenge. Empowerment through survivors was key in the whole process. Understanding that we are not replacing their mothers, that we are mentors, because this happens in a lot of programs. And also that if they heal, they will be able to protect their children. So any program that works with children who have been exploited or are in this system, they need to work with their mothers first. And also, a lot of work on strategic alliances, independence, and support networks when they leave the program. The last issue that we found was setting up a seasonal program. We hope to develop better in the second part of this project, because we understand that they can get too comfortable in the shelter And so we are doing a 6 months intensive and 6 months outside, where they already have to apply what they learned, where they find housing, and where they come 3 or 4 days a week. And we continue healing work. We support in creating positive networks wherever they go to live, and social skills, support children after school, physical and mental health, which is really important to maintain, and also their personal independence and claiming their rights in Colombia. So we're planning 6 months, 2 or 3 days, coming to seasonal, we call it a seasonal shelter, and then twice a month. And in the next 6 months, we will follow up on what they are doing. We believe the last important issue, and you've spoken about it, is we need to continue parallel advocacy efforts. And since I'm talking to Europe, I think the most important is promoting the Nordic model in wealthy countries. As long as this system makes money in euros and dollars, you will be using our women from vulnerable countries in the world. So I think that is one of the key things that you need to do. Understand that pornography is part of the Nordic model. It is violence against women. It is recruitment. It is trafficking. And to offer healing and economic options for women, I think that this image of Pornhub, in which the 7 first countries that consume pornography are G7, is a clear scenario of what is happening, the wealthy using the most vulnerable of the world. Thank you very much for your interest and understanding.
Thank you, Drisha. Every time I hear the presentations that are coming from the so-called Global South, it is such a reminder for me being in Europe, and I think it should be for all of us. I think as Europe, we must do better, and we must address the root causes of this, not only form of violence, but actually, as we see from the consequences on the women's life, it's a torture with very, very serious lifelong consequences. So I'm going to breathe out and yes, and have some water. But before, I'm going to pass the floor to another specialist expert, Jennifer Okeke from Immigrant Council of Ireland, who is also a partner in this consortium. But Jennifer has completed her PhD on the subject that she will share with us. And we thought that it is important, just as it is important to remember who are those women who are trafficked to Europe when they come from Colombia or Venezuela. And we do have a lot of Venezuelan women also in Spain, for example. There are important cultural, racial, ethnic, and religious aspects that we need to have in mind if we are to succeed in supporting these women. And Jennifer is going to tell us about one of such aspects. Thank you.
Very much for coming today. Okay. Thank you all for coming today. Sorry, I need to stand when I do presentations. I'm not very comfortable sitting down. My name is Jennifer Okeke. I came today, myself and my colleague, one of our solicitors in the organization where we represent migrant women who have been trafficked. We came today to be able to be part of this conference because we've been on this for the past 2 years. So it was very important for us to be here today. When we talk about, I'm going to be speaking specifically on what some of you might know as the African traditional religion. Because the thing is that when we talk about African traditional religion, most time people sometimes still see Africa as a country, as opposed to a continent with various countries within it, diverse ethnic people, diverse cultures, diverse religion. So it's important to remember that when we talk about Africa, it's a continent with multiple, I mean, loads and loads of cultures within this continent. And I'm going to be focusing more specifically on Nigeria. You know, again, when we talk about the African traditional religion, the question is, what is it? Or what is it not? Because Africa, there is no particular religion there. But within the African context, we have similarities in the things that we believe in our religion, or when we talk about those cultural practices or religious practices, there are often similarities. And one of them is what some call the African traditional religion. But it's just understanding that African traditional religion is not a particular thing per se. It's just beliefs that we share from country to country, from ethnic tribes to other ethnic tribes. And one of those similarities are our traditional and our religious beliefs. And within that religious beliefs, we have it's basically categorized into three. Sometimes it's splitted. When you go into the three, you can still split them further. But the major one is the belief in the supreme God. It doesn't matter which country you go into or which people, ethnic tribe you're talking to, there is a general belief in the supreme God. And we all have our different names that we call it, but at the end of the day, it's just that belief in the supreme God. The second level beneath the supreme God, you find the divinities or the ancestral, the ancestors. It's also a belief. We believe in the spirit. We believe in the ancestors. We believe that when they die, they transcend into this, into another realm, but they are still also there with us, and that they protect the land. So they just don't die and it's and that is it. They die, but they are still there with us, protecting the land and doing a lot of other things. And the third is the mystical beliefs or the mystical powers, or sometimes people call it magic, but for us it's mystical powers that exist within our cultures. So these are the areas where we as Africans share similarities when we talk about our cultural beliefs, our religious beliefs. Is just having that in mind. So when we are talking about that African traditional religion, what we are basically talking about is the similarities when it comes to our beliefs. One of the things that is important to understand that these similarities is because oftentimes that concept of the single story, there is no single story in Africa. We have multiples of stories that sometimes they interlink with each other, but there is no single story. I put in the Chimamanda Adichie. She's a Nigerian. She's actually from my tribe, yes. And I'm sure some of you know her. She was recently, not too long ago, invited to speak in Germany. And she talked about her chi. When we talk about the chi, is that supreme being that whether you enter into different countries in Africa, within countries, say again for Nigeria, within my own tribe, we call it the chi, your personal God. Within other tribes, the Benin Kingdom, they call it Osanobua, they have different names. The Yorubas call it Olodumare. So everybody have that their personal chi. And she talked about that personal chi of every African. And she used it to give the illustration of a man whose house was on fire, a very wealthy man. So you can imagine when the house is on fire, such a wealthy man will have a lot of things he wants to rescue from the fire. He wants to get out before the house burns down. But when that wealthy man ran into the house, all he took out from the burning house was the representation of his chi, the representation of his personal God, because the man understands that with his chi, he will rise again. So it is understanding what those beliefs means to us as Africans. It is our, sometimes it's hard to describe it, but I just use Chimamanda's illustration that she gave in Germany a few months ago when she was there, for you to understand the importance of those beliefs, those cultures, those traditions, those religions to an African. That a man, a very wealthy man, ran into his burning house. All he took was the representation of his chi and ran out of the house, because with his chi, he will rise from the ashes again. So when you talk about within the African context, I put this as, I am a very visual person. It's just to show you our different cultures, where we celebrate what our beliefs are, whether they're religious beliefs, cultural beliefs, a celebration of life. These are the ways we portray who we are and what is important to us, what is relevant to us. Like, for example, the woman, those are the worshippers of the Oshun worshippers. Those are worshippers of particular deities in Nigeria, or the ones at the top carrying the baskets. That is the New Yam Festival. The New Yam Festival, it's a very important festival for certain people in Africa, in Nigeria, where they kind of celebrate the bountifulness of the year, thanking their chi for giving them a good harvest, thanking their chi for the earth, what Mother Earth, Anna, what Mother Earth has given to them. And so it's just to highlight the various cultures within Africa and what those cultures, what those religious beliefs, the relevance of it to us. It's very important to us. And it's a very structured culture. It's always very structured. But from the outsider, it's a festival. But for an African coming from a particular ethnic place, it is more than just a festival. And just to bring it back into the European context, I use this just to bring it back into the European context, because sometimes it's easier when you bring it home for people to kind of understand the festival. This is a festival that Italians celebrate. It's very important to them. It has a cultural tone, it has a religious tone, and it's something supernatural in its own, because they celebrate and they go they go out, and people bring out their sick because they believe that something supernatural will happen. So it's also the fact that they believe in those spirits, because the saint that is being celebrated, he's dead, he's gone. So in other words, he's an ancestor. That is why they believe in it. They bring out their sick ones to celebrate the festival with the belief that, people that come out and be part of the festival might get their healing. It's almost that same kind of belief system. But however, when it comes down to Africa, sometimes it's almost as if it's a primitive way, but it's not. It's just, the lens you use to see things. The question always is, which lens are you looking from? Who's telling the story? And how is the story being told? And it's that concept of there is no single story. Because for myself as an African, I might wonder what's the relevance of this kind of festivity. But for an Italian, for somebody coming from Naples, this is very important to them. This is very relevant to them. This is their culture. This is their belief system. And it works for them. And they don't play with it. And for them, it's, and that is how it is for an African or a woman that is coming from a particular place. So using this illustration is just to bring it home sometimes, because oftentimes when you're talking about the order, it becomes difficult for people to understand. But when you bring it home, it becomes easier for the person to kind of try to understand what you're trying to say to them or what you're trying to explain to them. One of those cultural or religious practices within the African tradition is the oath-taking ritual. The oath-taking ritual is embedded within one of it's part of our religious practice. And what is that oath-taking ritual? It's the administration of justice. Just like you have your courts here, you have the police. If something happens, you drag the person to court. You have a structure, you have a way of doing within the European context. That is how, within the African context, we have a way of administering justice. We have our own belief system. We have our own law and order that has worked even before colonization happened. Africa did not exist with colonization. Africa was in existence before colonization. The people there had a way, had a life, had a belief system, had a structure before colonization. So when we speak about that old system, which is very important to understand, it's understanding what it is and what it is not. And it is specific to certain ethnic groups, but across countries, you still find the old system in one way or the other. And then if we bring it back into Europe, during the Christian, I've forgotten what they're called, the Christian of back then, within European context, they have the altars where they used to take oaths, or where the kings are made to take oaths. It's those kind of things. That is what the Europeans use there. But we, within the African context, we have our own way, So, and that is what the oath taking, because I know that most of you, people that work in frontline services, you sometimes come across women that talk about the oath ritual or the juju, because sometimes it's used interchangeably. So it's just basically understanding what that juju is about, what that oath ritual is about. And it is just basically, it's the way that we keep law and order. It's a way that we ensure that justice is done, that justice is served. It's a way that the Africans ensure that, there is no sort of criminality, and there is no intimidation, or a wealthy man intimidating a poor man because he feels he's wealthy. That does not happen when we apply this kind of our native structured traditional way of doing things. And that is what the old system is about. Or when you hear about the juju, that is what it's about. Oftentimes this juju, where does it happen? It happens in shrines. It happens in temples, because those shrines, again, are the gatekeepers of those shrines those are our ancestors. Those are our deities that we believe in. Those are our belief system. They are the ones that, they have certain shrines, and every ethnic group have their own deity that is very important to them. From, just like I mentioned, from my people, we have our chi, which is our supreme being. We have our Ana, which is the Mother Earth that blesses women with fertility. When a woman gets married, they tell you about making sacrifice to Ana so that you conceive and have male children and female children. So it is all of those kind of things that our shrines are meant for. Most of the time, those shrines are they are often kept by either a priest or a priestess, but most of the time you see a priest, a chief priest that keeps them, that takes care of the shrines. But on rare occasions, there are also certain deities that it has to be a woman that worships that deity, that keeps the deity. And this is where those oaths happens, where the two people will agree before that deity. And once you agree before that deity, nobody can go back on that agreement, except both of you go back to go and disagree in front of that deity. So it is that kind of law. It's a very structured way of doing things amongst the Africans, But what happened? The thing is that when colonization happened, this our very structured way of keeping justice was kind of pushed to the back burner. It became primitive. It became so many things that it was called, and Christianity came in, Islam came in, and those kind of those other religion kind of diluted the native way of doing things. But it did not eradicate it, but it diluted it to some extent, but it is still in existence. And it's just understanding it, because most time we come across juju or women telling us about juju, and we wonder, what are they talking about? When we bring it into the context of trafficking, statistics has shown that Nigerian women, specifically women coming from the Edo part of Nigeria, are one of the most trafficked women in Europe. It doesn't matter which country you're looking at within the EU. Whether you look, do the research yourself. Nigerian women will always be at least among the top 5 women being trafficked within the EU, any country you are looking at. And in 2005, Nigerian women were there. 2018, the data is showing that it's going on the increase. And within the Nigerian context, we are talking about specifically Edo women coming from the Edo kingdom. So it's important that we understand these things. What do traffickers do? How are these women trapped by the juju? The traffickers use the juju in a way that the juju is not meant to be used. They use our beautiful culture in a way that it is not meant for to be used. They take the women to the shrine and they make them take this oath in a very gruesome way. This is not what the oath is meant for. This is not what our ancestors laid down the oath for. But this is how the traffickers manipulate the oath and bring these women to take this oath. But again, it's also important to understand that the women themselves do not understand when they go into this oath that it takes two, and that this is not what the oath is meant for, because they deceive them into taking that kind of going through the rituals. What they say they will do is not what happens. But the women themselves is just the fear of the ritual, is the fear of the God they have gone before, before the shrine to take the oath, but they don't understand that the trafficker has already gone against the oath. So if they go against the oath, they are not doing anything wrong. But it is that lack of understanding also on the part of the women. But it's understanding how those traffickers use that oath, the ritual that is meant for something else, to keep the women trapped. When the women go through this ritual, because sometimes rituals and sacrifices, it involves sometimes animal sacrifices, it involves blood, animal blood. That is often the way the rituals are done, or some other ways. And sometimes it's the crop, like the New Yam Festival, is the yam that comes from the earth, and other vegetables that is used to thank the gods. But some other times it's the blood of an animal that is used to thank the gods. But it is this ritual that the traffickers use in a very gruesome way. And the women, what happens to them? The fear of the God, they understand the relevance of the deity they have gone before. But what they do not understand is that the traffickers themselves has gone against what the deity represents. So they become afraid. They become afraid to die. They become afraid for their family members to die. They become afraid of going mad. They become afraid of repercussion, that if they go against what they have promised to do, but not unbeknownst to them, that the trafficker themselves has gone against it. So they are not under any obligation to do what they've sworn to do at that shrine. So this is where the difference is. This is where the understanding comes in. But as practitioners, what are we meant to do when we come in contact with such women? I recently gave a 1-week training in Northern Cyprus, and this kind of things came up. And when I was speaking about the oath ritual, one of the realization is that like almost nobody in the hall understood what the oath ritual was before that day, almost maybe one or two, but it was a big auditorium. So when we come across these women, what are we meant to do? One of the things we must not do is judge. And we must not put ourselves in the victim's role, because we are not wearing their shoe. We don't understand them. We must not come from a place of judgment. I've put a list of a couple of things there that, the way you approach certain things, the way you understand that it's about the woman's story, it's about her reality. It doesn't matter if that reality does not, you don't understand it. It's working with the woman from her own points and not from yours. It's about forgetting everything you think you know and working with the woman, meeting her at her own reality. Those are very important when we come in contact with women that have been trafficked as practitioners. And what does it mean to support women? It means that when you come in contact with such women, you understand, first of all, that the juju is a very powerful tool. You might not understand it because when you're looking at it from a European lens, you would not understand it. But it's understanding how the woman sees it. For the woman, it's a very important and powerful tool, the juju, because she's coming from a culture where she understands the importance and relevance of it. It's also recognizing and accepting her own belief system Because if you don't recognize and accept her own belief system, we always use the word holistic support, holistic assistance. How can it be holistic if you don't even understand what the woman is talking about? How can you give that holistic support? So it is understanding and meeting the woman in her own reality. That is very important. And that is what makes sense to the woman, because when it doesn't matter if you don't know what her culture is about, but you understand where she's coming from, then she's comfortable to talk to you. But women that are that have been trafficked, one thing I can tell you working with them is that they are very smart women. They are very smart women. They might not be educated, but they are very streetwise. And the minute they read body language very easily. And if they just understand you don't believe them, they shut down, because the question becomes, why am I talking to you if you don't even understand what I'm talking about? And how do we do this? It is that concept of, and the importance, understanding the cross-cultural approach, that cross-cultural awareness. And it does not mean you have to go into learn everything about the Edo Kingdom or learn everything about the ethnic groups in Nigeria. No, that's not what I'm talking about. But it's that understanding that this woman is coming from a different lens. When I'm dealing with an Edo woman, I must I must look at it from a different lens and not from a European or Europe-centric lens. That is what looking at those cross-cultural approach, cross-cultural awareness, what it means to the woman and not what it means to you, because it's always about the woman, always about her reality. And it's always about understanding that irrespective of, there is no single story. What you know about a woman that has been trafficked from Europe will be totally different from a woman that has been trafficked from Africa, or the one that has been trafficked from Southern America. It's understanding that there is no single story. The question is, what is the woman's story? And are you willing to understand and meet her where she is at? Thank you very much.
But we will have, I'm sure we will have some questions, but the question time is in the end of the of this event. And now I'm going to invite Blessing. Just after Blessing, we will have a short break, but we wanted to have, none of us are survivors of trafficking. We know a lot about trafficking. We work with the women who are exploited in the system of prostitution, who have been trafficked internally across international borders, but we are not direct victims of this crime. And we have here a woman with us who would like to share her story. And we thank Blessing for coming and being with us. If you want, you can speak you're free to be with us here, or you can speak from the podium, wherever you wish.
Good evening. My name is Blessing Okwedio. I am the president and co-founder of Weavers of Hope, a survival-led organization in Italy. And where I'm here today, bringing also greetings from my co-survivors in the organization. And I will not be able to start my story without thanking the support of Iroko Onlus to the survivors of Weavers of Hope. I can remember in 2013 when I was trafficked to Italy. When I was trafficked to Italy, it dawned on me that that trafficking is not only limited to the uneducated people is not only limited to illiterate. Because being a graduate, I never thought that anybody will be able to deceive me, will be able to convince me, will be able to just deceive me and traffic me to another country. Then when it happens to me, my first reaction was, I just have to cancel this story. I just have to cover up. I just have to go back to Nigeria immediately. I do not want anybody to associate this phenomenon with me. What am I going to tell my parents that have made a lot of sacrifices to see me through my education? How would they be able to take this, that the fact that I have been trafficked? Then I have to just try to cover up everything in order not to break the hearts of my parents. Just the way it is today, to so many victims. Because at times we see that many people, we don't really talk about the concept of sex trafficking. Many people understand the fact of prostitution, and people are stigmatized on that level, that you are a prostitute. Because when I was in Nigeria, when they talk about victims of human trafficking, when they are repatriated, they are stigmatized in the society. Nobody wants to associate with them because, in fact, we don't call them victims. They are called prostitutes. Because prostitutes are stigmatized and nobody wants to get associated with it. Then, at that very instant, I said, I just have to go back. Then how can I go back? I have to go and report to the police. Then when I reported to the police, they took me to a safe house in the Naples of Italy. Then there in this safe house, I was there waiting to go to the court because I was thinking that they will call me. That today they never called me. It's almost nine years. Then I can't go back to Nigeria because, honestly speaking, I know that when they talk about human trafficking, all we all know then is about prostitution. Is your voluntary action. You do not want to, you want to make money in an easy way. That is why you're going out of the country. Then what is somebody's business? Then, but I can tell you that even when I was in Nigeria, we hear about people fighting, family are being killed, families are being and driven away from their homes by the traffickers, but all these people were never considered as traffickers. But the victims also were never considered as victims. They were considered as ingrates, while the traffickers were considered as philanthropists. Then they living in such context and coming to Europe, and like I try to imagine myself like going back to Nigeria, and these people coming. Nobody understand the fact that I am a victim. Nobody understand the fact that you were deceived, because they do no longer talk about deceiving you, that of employment, that many people today, they are victims of this just because of the fact that nobody will believe them. Some have to remain, some have to be running from countries to countries because they are afraid, to their shame, 3, they are ashamed of being stigmatized, 4, they are afraid that nobody will believe them. How can they believe me? How will I tell somebody that I do not know that I was going to end up as a prostitute? Many people remain in that net today because of this fact that the society will not believe. We formed this organization because we do not care whether the society believe or not. All we want is freedom. All we want is a dignified life, because every human being has right to a dignified life and a life of freedom. That at times, you know, when I see people talking about human trafficking, when I see the way the topic of prostitution is being treated, I see it's nothing. People talk about it, just you don't actually know what people are passing through. You don't know what, as it is a total annulment of your life, because you are no longer living. Even though you are existing, you are no longer living. The life is no longer yours. There is somebody else controlling your life. There is somebody else. You don't even know what to do. You are confused. You are afraid. You sleep in fears. You get used to it. You have to do everything to make yourself adapt. And somebody wants to tell me that is a voluntary action? No, because I have been there. I know what it means. I know what it can leave in your life, the impact, the negative impact it can leave in your life, even after being rescued. It finishes somebody, your dignity, your self-esteem. There was a time that I no longer believe in myself. I no longer believe in my words. There was a time I no longer believe in my proficiency, my computer proficiency. Because as a graduate of computer science, and what I could do then, I no longer believe that I can do it. Just for a few days on the street. Imagine somebody that have lived in the street for a year and for more than a year. The effect and the impact, the negative impact it can have on that person. Thank you.
Well, this is why it is important to speak and to listen to survivors, and not just the story about those women. And this is why we think this project is so important, and we are grateful to all our partners and to our funders and to those who came today, because it is through collaborations like this and through really deep work with the women. This is not a superficial work. We're not speaking here about, you know, you pass through the office and then you come out reformed and restored and healed. This is not how it works. And we know, and thank you, Blessing, and to your group as well. We have a lot of survivors groups across Europe. We have a lot of testimonies. And again, I go back to my initial point. In Europe, we have money, we have tools, and we have laws, and we must do better to support and to protect these women. And I now invite everyone to take a very short break. It will be 10 minutes maximum. And then we have an exchange, roundtable discussion and exchange with you, hopefully. Thank you. I will not be sitting among the panelists this time, but I have to introduce the panelists. First of all, we have the wonderful Gunilla Ekberg with us, who is going to moderate or chair this panel. Gunilla is a human rights lawyer, and she's a researcher, and she's from Sweden. And thank you for coming and being with us. And we have, from left to the right, we have Ezohia Gatise, who is herself from Nigeria as well. And she's in Italy, and she's the founder and then the director of Iroko Onlos, one of the partners. And then we have Hasmik Manukyan, who is from Solvodi in Germany. It's Christina introduced already, so I will not speak about it. And then we have Gosha Chrysantou, who is in Cyprus with Caritas Cyprus. And finally, we have Mary Henderson, who is a colleague of Jennifer, Immigrant Council of Ireland, and that's it. And the lawyer, yes, the person who takes cases to court, very important person. Oh, yes. Yeah.
Is it on now? Can you hear me? Yes, good. I feel like I was in an interview studio. Thank you for wanting to remain here and listen to how we are going to discuss how the GESI model that is being presented today, how it's been actually implemented concretely with the 4 organizations that these women are representing. And you also have to remember that these are very different countries with very different legal systems, very different level of poverty, different victims. So we have 7 questions that we're going to try and go through, but we will stay here if you want to ask questions of these women later when we're done. So sisters, the first question that I'm interested in knowing is, and you can answer all of them if you like, is what was the most important aspect of the development of the GESI model in your work? How has it had an impact in what you do? Who wants to start? Okay. All right.
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for remaining to listen to us. We try not to make it too boring. What has been really important is the way we've been able with the setting up of the GESI model to standardize the work we do. We've all been working with victims of trafficking, and we had practices that we already put in place. With this project, we're able to bring those practices together in a much more structured way with exchange of best practices between us as groups. So that has really helped to improve the way we provide services to the women that we serve. So that has been very, very useful for us in Iroko, and I would believe also for others who implemented that part of the project.
And we should say that most of the victims you serve are Nigerian women who are trafficked to Italy. Is that correct?
Yes. The greater majority are Nigerian women, although we also serve women from Eastern Europe and some from a few from Latin America and from North Africa, but mainly over 70% are Nigerians.
Thank you. Who wants to continue? Gosha, you can take that microphone.
We often talk about victim-centered approach. We talk about how we work with the victims, but what was very beautiful for me about this project is that the victims were a part of it. There was space, safe space for the victims to talk and share what their needs were, for us to learn a lot. So it was a two-way exchange really of experiences, on which then I think both parties benefited. We by learning a lot, and the survivors by receiving services that we've realized were in response to their needs, rather than us designing something that we think they needed. They had space, safe space to verbalize what they needed and for us to be able to respond. And the response was practical, and I believe today benefit. it was what we did in Cyprus. We had one-on-one meetings with with survivors, victims of trafficking, when it concerned psychosocial and medical services. And legal services, but when we discussed employment opportunities and what it meant for them to be economically empowered, we created groups and did workshops in groups. And this was really beautiful because the workshops created space for them to meet each other in a safe environment and to actually exchange their own ideas and create friendships and being empowered by one another, to no longer feel socially excluded, but to be a part of a community that they very clearly missed. And we had no idea before this project that that was the case. So it was really beautiful to discover how they discovered each other and how they want to continue actually in the same way, but in a community now, not on their own.
Thanks, Gunilla. I think for us, it was really important that we recognize that it was a holistic approach. So even though we're delivering very different types of services, that we were able to draw on general principles of best practice of providing services to survivors of human trafficking. And so whether that was the services I provided, such as delivering legal services, or the economic empowerment programs, or the psychosocial services that are delivered under the project and have been elaborated in the model, it has all been victim-centered, and it has incorporated the voice of the survivor, both from the design and then during its implementation as well.
Hello, everyone. Yes, in Solvodi, we also give very much importance to victim-centered approach, and we found this actually to be the most important aspect of JASIM, because the individual needs were always in the center in all our activities, be it group activities, be it info cafes, be it one-to-one counseling, and also helping women to find jobs, and till the end of the implementation phase of the project.
Something that's really interesting, I think, with the JASIM model is that it's based on feminist principles. And so I'm curious how what is your opinion of that, and how has that informed the work that you do? You want to start this way?
I think the main aspect of that feminist approach is the recognition that women have specific needs that need to be recognized and addressed as women, meeting them where they are as women, providing that safe space where they can express those needs, and ensuring that the kind of attention they get when you're providing services, even in cases, for instance, where you're offering some kind of training, you provide that extra support that as women they need, especially when they are women who have children and they have extra needs around that. So that was one aspect. The other aspect also was the kind of policy issues when you're talking about women's issues, policy issues, when talking with those who are in a position to change the law, and making them to recognize that with women, you need to give something extra, and not just see it as a generalized kind of approach. I think that was part of what was.
Garcia, do you want to say something about this?
Yeah. When we talk about women, we talk about mothers, and we talk about wives who build homes. And I think this is a very, very important aspect when we look generally at the population. When we're dealing with a woman, we're dealing with a potential for future, incredible potential that is there to pass on who she is, what her values are, on to future generations. And this is a huge responsibility for all of us to make sure that the women have support. Every single woman in this world have support to be to be fully who she's been designed to be and to reach her full potential. When we're talking about victims of trafficking, we've already heard the devastation that this does to every human being, and to women especially, the consequences of her being so hurt, so wounded, so destroyed internally, and leaving these consequences untouched, unhealed, will have impact on future generations. And we just cannot ignore this this factor that is built into this situation, that a woman needs this additional effort, this special touch, because of her being the sanctuary of future life, and being the mother of children to come. Inevitably, in most cases, they will have families, and therefore it's very, very important that they are strong, they are empowered, they can recover as much as possible, and the wounds are healed for them to become that powerhouse that is required when bringing children into life and providing support to future generations.
Thanks. Yeah, I think when we look at the kind of feminist approach, like it's woman-centered, and we're in trying to achieve an equality of outcome for women, and that does not exist. Let's be frank. But equally, we also recognize the individual needs that a woman may have in order to try and achieve her best possible outcome. And so we want to be able to offer support of safety and security in how she's engaging with us. So, for example, when we're delivering legal services, we, at the law center where I work, we have women lawyers working there to provide some level of safety and security around issues of disclosure. But equally, when we're engaging additional experts that a person may need to be referred to in order to take a legal proceeding, we prefer and seek to engage women experts, unless that our survivor has indicated that she's comfortable with a male expert. So that could be an interpreter, a cultural mediator, a decision maker in a tribunal. We can set that out as a preference. Or equally, when a person is providing disclosure of having been trafficked. There are sometimes that a woman would be providing very detailed disclosures, and she may be the only woman in the room if she does not have a representative who is a woman. And that is a very difficult position for somebody who has been exploited sexually to be in. So when we talk about a feminist approach, it's kind of both an underlying principle, but also just a very practical way of tweaking what we do, and just taking a step back and asking, is this individual safe, and does she feel comfortable in what she is doing and the service she's receiving from us?
Over all those years, Solvodi has been working only with female victims, and it has been always our approach to give this full awareness to the women that they have their rights, and even lacking some legal status, it does not mean that they don't have the full rights to have the dignity, as Blessing was talking about, living in our society. So it was of utmost importance for us, for helping them to repair their self-esteem after being traumatized, and also see us as this helping hand, that we are there for them. And we will do our best that they finally achieve this dignified life that they deserve to live.
Yeah. Because maybe this I should have mentioned this as well, as a more down-to-earth approach. In the project, we one of the things that we did was touch on the topic of sexual health. And again, if we're talking about sexual health, if we're talking about STDs, if we are talking about unplanned pregnancies, contraception, we're talking about women. We don't discuss these topics with men. So again, this is another way that this project has really helped us understand the women better, and I think helped women to go about the practicalities that they are faced with in a better way, better informed way.
It's interesting you talk about speaking about sex education, understanding your body, understanding how your body has been invaded by those who purchase and use you. And I know that you also have in your project worked on sex education. So I would, because I think in my experience of having worked a lot on this topic, that the sexual and reproductive rights of victims who are victims of trafficking for sexual exploitation are often ignored because it's difficult to talk about. Women have very difficult relationships to their bodies and what has been done to them. Often in psychological terms, their bodies are turned off, so they don't feel them. So I think that it's very interesting that you in your organizations worked on it. So I would love to hear what you have to say, what you did at Solvodi.
Of course, our counselors were organizing on a regular basis one-to-one counseling sessions where they had more intimacy and could talk about topics which could not be easy to do in group meetings. And after being able to explain what their health problems, health issues are, Solvodi counselors were trying their best to refer to these women to specialists, making sure that they know about their body, their issues, and if it is FGM, if they need some reconstruction of FGM, for example. Also doing some special sessions on sex education, and also on pregnancy, reproduction, and issues about sexuality too. So there were many different aspects discussed with the women, also in a safe space for them.
Yeah, we also did a lot of work on that aspect with the women, because what came out very strongly was sometimes the impression, what they were given, what they were taught, that they had no rights over their own bodies. They couldn't take decisions about their own bodies, that someone else had the right to dictate what happened to their own bodies. So we did a lot of work on that, on making them, on providing that safe space for them to be able to freely express that need and that importance of being the ones to determine what to do with their bodies. I think this is one of the very important aspects with women generally, but especially with women whose agency as women has been taken away during the trafficking process, where you now reintroduce them in a certain sense, assist them in coming back into contact with themselves and with that capacity to take that decisions and know that they are right. So it's at the beginning, it's almost a kind of helping them by validating the decisions they take until they realize that, yes, I have the right to take this decision. It's my body, and I am the one who in the first place can say it. So I think that was one of the major results that we achieved.
I'm very glad that you all have worked on that, because as I said before, it's not obvious that a lot of organizations actually think about that. And many women who have been trafficked also have experiences prior to being trafficked, having been sexually abused as children or living with abusive partners. So in a sense, many of them have never known their own sexuality or known their own bodies. I used to work at the feminist health center, where we had women who didn't know anything about their bodies. We had to start from the beginning and describe what the different parts of our body does and what you can do with them. And I think that for women who have been sexually abused, it's a long road, but it's important to start talking about it. So I'm very pleased to hear that you're working on that. Yeah.
Also, not less important was almost all the women we had in JASIM, they were traumatized because they experienced more than one form of torture, physical, mental, and all types of torture. So therefore, for us, also importance was their mental health, not only their bodily and physical health. And after coming to first time coming to our counselors, the first issue was security, of course, if they are secure enough, if they are in any danger, and the next question was health, and it was also mental health. So if there was necessity, and in most cases there were referrals to therapists. One aspect was that thanks to Jasmine, the women slowly, but they developed also trust and understanding that the therapy is, or those providing these services, along with our own counseling, that they are for their own benefit and they are support. And in fact, they were refusing, or in the beginning, they had less trust and they could not hear about therapy.
It's interesting. So we've been talking a lot about survivors during the day, and we've been talking a lot about survivors and the involvement of survivors in this project. So I would like to ask all four of you how you have involved survivors, and what are the benefits of actually having that in your program. Who wants to start? Mary?
Yeah, so in Ireland, our application of the JASM model was delivering legal services. So every single one of the people I worked with is a survivor of human trafficking. So the experiences that they're explaining in the cases and the difficulties that they are highlighting, like the learning that I have from those cases, is brought into the project. That's in the delivery. In the overall design of the project, we encourage the voice of the survivor at the very beginning to understand what the gaps are in both Ireland and throughout all of the countries in which the project was implemented, in order to be able to design the system to attempt to address those gaps. And that was really important, to have that survivor's voice there. So I think for Ireland, that was kind of how we incorporated the voice to ensure that the women were properly represented and that we're continuing to properly represent their desires and wishes.
We have a walk-in center in Nicosia in Cyprus. So it's a very safe place for anybody to just come in and ask for any service. We also run humanitarian support. So it's easy for a woman to come and ask for a food pack or ask for help to speak to a landlord without revealing the story, which gives her a bit of a camouflage. The women are not stigmatized, so they are freer to access the services available. But we take advantage of the access, if I may use this word, and go deeper, because this is the premise of the organization, to see how else can we help you. If you need food, why do you need food? What else can we address so that we can solve your problem long term rather than just fill the gap? And this gave us an opportunity to gather the stories from the women. When the time came for the project, we had them, we've known them, we've built trust with them. So a few phone calls, a little bit of encouragement, and they were very willing to participate in the project. Also because a lot of the issues remained unresolved, not because we didn't address them when they came to us, it's because they are long-term issues, the very irregular and low support that they receive, difficulties with employment and all other issues. They are ongoing in Cyprus there. And therefore, the support that women, that everybody in terms of from the migrant community needs is constant. And this helps us to keep touch with women and continue the relationships.
Yes, we worked with survivors within this project and with all other our different projects, also national projects, and we already have recognized the needs and their struggle and their challenges with the system. For example, getting permit. Having this also stress with asylum procedures, etc. And so Wodi was, for example, also always supporting them with accompanying to the interviews if needed in the asylum procedure, also giving them recommendations or writing supporting letters to BAMF, which is the Federal Refugee Center in Germany, in many ways to help them at first to get their residence permit, even if it is temporary permit, because otherwise you cannot get any services. any social health, medical services in Germany. So that was very important. And while designing this project, we already had in mind all these struggles, all these problems and challenges. Of course, they are still there because the system changes do not happen that quickly, unfortunately, but we still are aware of them. And we were very happy to have all these also consortium experiences and to compare and to find the best practices to starting from the design of the project.
For us, survivor participation has always been a part of the practice that we do. And indeed, when preparing our own response to some of the program construction, we spoke with some of the survivors we work with. And then when we did the interviews with the women, Blessing was one of those who helped to actually structure the questions and also carried out some of the interviews herself. So what we always do is to try to start off from the survivor perspective. What do they think of this project? You know, you give it to them and say, okay, what do you think of it? What do you think would be the best aspect to address? What kind of, because they know better really on a lot of these issues, what the main issues are and how to address them. So we just put in that other part of the expertise of who to approach and how to do it. So they were really a major part of the construction of the project and of the implementation itself.
Of course.
We're talking about survivors. When we meet survivors or when we meet victims, the assumption is that they know that they are survivors or they know that they are victims. Our experience is very often that until we touch the story, the women don't even know that they are victims of trafficking. They don't know they've suffered, and all they know is that they've suffered. But they don't know that there is a legal framework existing that could actually help them access additional rights. They could receive more support. It is very important to recognize that a lot of women out there don't even know. And Jassim allowed us to provide the informative sessions as well, and hopefully it will snowball in the communities. We used to also do referrals. A lot of women would come to us with their stories, and a few years ago, one of the purposes of our walk-in center was to identify the possible victims of trafficking and refer them through the national referral mechanism to the authorities to investigate cases, and then for them to be able to access their rights. This is how we meet them. But yes, it's very, very important that we look for them and we provide support when we find them.
So we have described a lot of positive aspect of this project, but I think we also need to look at what systemic barriers you run into while designing and implement this project, because we all know that this is very much an ideal situation you were describing, but there are in different jurisdictions different barriers. So I would like to hear from all four of you, if you can just tell us what has made it more difficult or what can be changed to make it more easy, whichever you prefer. Want to start?
I want I will share the sad stories with you, so we finish on a more positive note by the time we reach the end of the line, because the reality in Cyprus is very sad. Unfortunately, there are lots of systemic barriers that either make the women continue suffering or re-victimize them, even I would use that word. The access to employment is very limited, if non-existent. Of 47 women that we interviewed that worked with us within the project, only 5 are in employment, and all of them want to be employed. Why? Because living without regular income that the government does not provide is really very, very difficult. So they all yearn to be independent financially, provide for themselves, stay away from a very degrading treatment they receive while trying to access benefits and receive them. If they start receiving them, they cannot survive on them, and the benefits do not come regularly. This drives them into destitution. Destitution leads to exploitation, and we are back to square one. So these are the systemic barriers that we face in Cyprus regularly. We don't know how to overcome yet. The size of the problem is not really for NGOs. It is a national scale problem in Cyprus right now. And maybe you are aware this is partly or maybe primarily due to the numbers of refugees coming to Cyprus right now, the highest per capita in Europe. And the country is clearly not coping. And finding in the sea of people, finding these few vulnerable ones who are victims of trafficking becomes harder and harder, because the vulnerability assessments are struggling to perform up to standard. And this is the reality we face.
Thanks. Yeah. I think like applying the JASM model, it allowed us, well, I mean, we kind of knew what the systemic problems were, but it really highlighted that they existed. When at the beginning of the implementation, I knew there was no compensation for victims of trafficking available in Ireland. I know that there's no safe and appropriate accommodation for victims of trafficking in Ireland. You know, we're failing on those obligations within the directive. But additionally, there are no enhanced rights to family reunification for women victims of trafficking, even where they have a residence permission or a long-term residence permission in Ireland. They're considered in the exact same, as a sponsor of even a child, would be considered in the exact same way as another migrant worker would be, so often with regard to their financial considerations. This is a systemic problem, and while we tried to address it during the implementation period, you know, as a lawyer, I can only act when I have a client who wants to do that, but equally the short implementation period of the project is kind of in itself a barrier to seeing how it can be understood, but equally it highlights the long-term nature of the needs of victims of trafficking, and how that, you know, some of the clients I work with have been, the women that I work with have been using the services of the Immigrant Council for many years. And it comes back to what Blessing was saying about stigmatization, because even when, for example, a person is making a citizenship application in Ireland, they have to explain how, when, and why they first entered the country. So just in that very, what should be quite a joyous application, really, of trying to recognize new citizenship, comes back to this original fact of a very depressing circumstance. So there are many barriers, but for me, certainly, the lack of access to family reunification is one that is really difficult to like be able to see, know, and understand, but not to actually be able to address during the project.
I think along with these systemic challenges, which we of course also faced in Germany, given the reality that prostitution is also legalized there, and if the women do not report, which they don't do for good reasons when they are afraid, and they have different reasons to be afraid, of course, we know already, we have talked about this issue also. Then if they have a residence permit, that makes it easy for them, but still integration is a long way, like starting with learning a language and finding a job in Germany with German language, and struggling when you're a single mother with childcare issues, and when a woman is traumatized, and when especially when she's going through this asylum procedure, integration and learning something new is maybe the last thing that she can afford to do. So this is one barrier that our counselors on daily basis also see and witness. Another barrier was this impact was on all countries, this COVID-19 pandemic, which affected greatly all services we were providing, starting from it had also psychological impact on women because of the isolation, and as we found out, they had no social contacts, and they were mostly isolated in the society. So it made even more difficult because their only trust person, their counselor, they had no opportunity to meet on regular basis. And also health issues were not solved because of not being able to visit doctors, even if they had severe pain, and not being able to accompany them to doctors. So there were many issues, not being able to organize this info cafes for the women, which was important to know their rights, to know all these issues like sex education and other issues. So not everything was possible to organize online and in digital way. And we had also women in shelter houses, for example. I also speak in general, not only now, because that impact was so huge on all our projects, that in shelter houses, we also had consultation with specialists on their addresses hidden, and if they use tablets or they use any device, they can be again tracked, and this is already dangerous for their security. So there were many reasons why also not on phone, not on video call, any counseling, especially on these painful topics, could take place. There was some barrier for us to organize info cafes, but it was rather positive. Many single women, thanks to JASIM economic empowerment model, they got jobs, and they were single mothers, and they were working in the morning hours, so they could not attend the info cafes. But this was, of course, for us, positive outcome for the project.
Yeah, thank you. No, the same similar barriers in Italy as in Cyprus, Ireland, and Germany. And what we identified is the structured nature of these barriers. You know, the question, for instance, of language, the question of national origin and access to jobs, the lack of those structures that recognize that as women, they have specific needs, and that they will need resources for those specific needs, and the absence of those resources, and the fact that sometimes you find that the organizations, the large recognized organizations in the Italian context, to become an NGO as it is recognized internationally is different for us. You have to go through a certain kind of context, and that also limits the possibility to access certain kinds of funding that will allow us to provide more support to the women. So you find that organizations that really don't have that expertise or experience are the ones who do get this money because they have that structure. So that was also one of it. And then the question of the time frame for the recognition of the women as victims of trafficking. Sometimes it takes such a long time, and at the end, they could end up not even obtaining residence permits and finding that they are nowhere. They're just left in a limbo without any recognition of their position. And it is always very difficult to continue to support them in that. And then, of course, the question of that discrimination, that continuous discrimination, and even where sometimes they do get jobs, sometimes they lose it when they open up a little bit and, you know, say to the employer what they had been through. And then that stigmatization of saying, oh, you've been in that world, I don't want you near me, and, you know, they lose their jobs. So there are various levels of these barriers that we discovered. And this program has helped us a lot to try to address them, to see best practices that we shared. And during the COVID-19 period, what we discovered that some of them now fell back and were newly re-exploited online. I remember somebody saying, oh, now that there's a lockdown in COVID, trafficking has stopped. No, trafficking did not stop. On the contrary, there were different types of trafficking going on, different types of exploitative things going on to those that at a certain period had already succeeded in exiting, but were pulled in because they had no other source of income And so they were re-exploited online during the lockdown period. And that had a further impact on mental health and mental and physical health and a lot of other issues it raised. It would be nice to be able to bring in positive things sometimes. I think the main positive aspect is the fact that this project was there to address these issues. So from that point of view, it's positive. But what you see sometimes can be a bit depressing. Yeah.
We're running out of time, so I want to thank you so much. It's been very interesting to listen to all four of you, and hopefully we'll be able to continue with the work after the end of the project, because I think from the exterior looking into it, I think it's a project that, especially in the increased refugee crisis as a result of the war in Ukraine, this model should be applied also in some of the countries that were part of the project that at the time did not were not able because they are source countries, but now see an influx of women who are trafficked from Ukraine to Lithuania and Latvia. So I just want to end saying that I think this is a fantastic project and you're doing wonderful work. Thank you.
No, but we have a mic. Maybe I can take. No, but we have one with the microphone. We have a couple of questions online as well, but otherwise, that's the time to ask questions if you have any. Towards the panelists who just spoke, but also the previous speakers, feel free because they're still online as well. So who would like to go first? It's always the most challenging things, the first question. Any questions or comments? No? We were so persuasive and that there are no questions at all. But well, maybe I can ask a question, but I actually have a question for Drisha, which connects to US service providers. I have a very specific question about working with specialist medical institutions and doctors, which obviously applies to survivors of various forms of, especially sexual violence in the case of women, but specifically survivors of sexual exploitation and trafficking for sexual exploitation. And Drisha is still here. And maybe you can also speak about your experience, how easy or difficult it is, because for us, we produced also a report on mental health. We know that we need to work on women's health, and it has to be body, but also mental health. And how do you bring actually the medical professionals who have expertise, but we know it's also highly biased towards women's sector as a whole, into this conversation and in service provision? Drisha.
Hi, Anna. Thank you. Well, we were able to motivate a prestigious university in Colombia, St. Xavier's University. And it's been very difficult, very difficult because we did start, they have a company so we started by using the company to assess the mental and physical health of the women before they start the program. And then at the end of the program, to see if the program does have any effect on the lives of women. We've done from blood tests to x-rays, et cetera, like all the key things. But the severity of their health issues is so big. I mean, they don't know how to ask questions to the women. They don't know where they come from. Even if we did a lot of training, we did some training before, doctors in general think they are above and they can treat everybody else in the same way. No, so we're losing a lot of information. They just gave us a report, and in the report it says that they all have had how do you call this, the surgery not to have any more babies. I don't know how you say it in English. And then we were surprised, and we were like, "Are you sure? I mean, I'm sure they don't even know what that surgery is about. And when they asked the women again, they said, oh, when I had a baby, they just did something to me, but I don't know if it's that surgery. Okay, so it's that bad. They will ask the questions. They don't know if the women have the concepts. They don't bring their language down to a really clear, simple language that women will understand. And that's why information tends not to be so good. We are slowly getting a younger generation of doctors into the multidisciplinary work, working with anthropologists, with psychologists, and informing themselves, knowing that the people at the shelter have much more and better information. So we're crossing, I mean, the information they give the doctors with the information we have at the shelter. And that's giving us much, much better information. But it's a challenge to work with doctors, psychiatrists also. I mean, they can do all the diagnosis, but then they don't know what to do to help the women. Right? So we are working with reflexologists. We're trying to get them out of medicine. We have been able to do this because they also become addicted to medicine. They think that's the way to get out or to survive. It's not only drugs, it's not only alcohol, it's also addiction to medicine. So we do have important results there, but it has to do with the use of other techniques and having doctors open their mind to those other techniques, tapping, havening, reflexology, yoga, nature, etc., is key and they're recognizing this in the results, but we still need them to really go on the ground, to go to the shelter, to share with the women, to be on the day-to-day. So hopefully one day we'll find those doctors.
If I can say something about our own experience in Italy, from 1996, I think it was Jennifer who mentioned about the cultural aspect of providing services to victims and survivors of sex trafficking. Now, in our own context, what we found that many women ended up in a psychiatric ward because of the application of Western standards in decoding the cultural contents of what they brought to the doctors. So the fact that they laugh, 1 minute they're laughing, the next they're dancing, the next they're smiling, that means they're off, something has gone wrong. But for the women, to dance and sing is not a sign that you're happy. It's their way of elaborating the trauma they've been through. And this was not recognized at the beginning. So together with a now professor of psychiatry, Dr. Beneduce, in Turin, we set up Franz Fanon Center, where we use cross-cultural therapy and mediation. So during a therapy process, you have members, depending on what the woman wants, you can have members of her family, a sector made up of psychologists, psychiatrists, anthropologists, because that cultural aspect, and trained cultural mediators. I know that cultural mediation is not something that's used so much in other parts, but in Italy, it's a very crucial part of that medical attention. When you go to hospital, you have a trained cultural mediator who acts as a bridge to decode the cultural contents, because the fact that someone speaks the language correctly does not necessarily mean that she communicates the meaning of what she wants to say. So it's so important to have that. And that has been a very crucial part when dealing with not just the physical health, but especially mental health issues. And that has saved a lot of the women from being railroaded, yes, and sectioned off as, completely off and being given drugs that they really didn't need. So that has been a very, very useful method approach of cross-cultural mediation and therapy.
Very good, thank you. Gosha, you want to answer?
Specialized medical services undeniably are a great need. What we found, we accompanied women to protect them from standard treatment of the doctors, which may be inadequate or not enough, and also to explain what the doctors say. I can really identify with what Drusha says, that women really cannot understand medical language the doctors use. And even when we say, please explain slowly and clearly, the doctors just, shoot off in their own way. So the approach is very important, but also what has transpired in our experience with women when we accompany them to doctors of various kinds is the threshold of pain is lower than usual. I think I didn't do statistics on it, but we can see a woman go off for no reason or any smallest reason. And the behavior or the reaction may be very strange. Again, I remember one time with a dentist, the woman got so frightened that was cowering in the corner of the room, and we could not convince her for at least half an hour to come back and sit, because the pain brought the memories, the trauma was just revived all over again, and she could not come to terms with it. So we have strange reactions as well, and we don't call it strange. For us, we expect them to come, but for the doctors who have not witnessed it, it's strange, and the reactions may not be appropriate, and somebody has to explain every time.
Just to add that currently in Solvodi, we also have other European Union project where the focus of this AMIF project is also to make sure, or to through handbooks and through all other materials, give our expertise to medical health specialists, not only doctors, but also in general, first contacts in the hospitals who witness the victims, but they cannot identify. So it is also very important for identification, because working with these health sector members and collaborating, if they are aware that a woman can be victim of trafficking, it's really important. It's not only about her health issue to be solved, but also to report, to refer to some social or psychological centers where she can also get further help. That's very important.
Thank you. We have one more question online. Actually, we have two questions online, but I'm going to combine them in one because it concerns women from Nigeria. There is one question, why it is Nigerian women, why there is such statistics. And the second question about, is actually, I suppose it is for Jennifer, but unfortunately Jennifer had to leave because she had a commitment to give a lecture. So, but it is the question about suspending the judgment in the context of cultural mediation and understanding these traditions of oath and juju and so on. And I mean, basically, it's a very long question, but to summarize it, where is this balance that we find between the feminist approach when we actually center the needs of the woman and we apply the universal human rights versus when we go along the, accepting the culture, which very often conceals also abusive practices, as we know. We don't take any culture for granted. So how do you deal with this in a practical way?
Okay, I think that my time is. I'll try as much as I can to respond. Why Nigeria? I got into this question of trafficking issues in the 90s, early 90s, and that was the first question: why Nigerian women, and why from that specific ethnic group? Because it is one of those ethnic groups where women's rights, they are not supposed to end up where they ended up. The question of their capacity to determine what happens to them, how come they are now the ones going into this kind of area? So what we found as a preliminary study was that when Nigeria was an economically viable, in quote, country from influx of petroleum oil, so there was a lot of money, that one of military rulers said the question was not money, but how to spend it. So what used to happen was Nigerians, they started off coming into in the 90s, before the 90s, in the 70s and 80s, coming into Europe to trade, buying thin clothes, shoes, and taking it back. And they had a huge market for all these kinds of products. And then the price of oil fell on the global market, and so there was less money, and this kind of trade was no longer so profitable. And then they discovered that the trade in women, because you know that sexualized idea of the African woman, you know, and it became the new kind of thing. Oh, well, why don't you bring these women, because there are men who would like to have that experience, that curiosity. And so a little at a time, those who used to come to buy clothes and shoes and bags to sell now discovered that they could offer women to come into a country like Italy. And Italy was the main center and remains the main center of entrance into Europe. From that specific group coming, you bring in these women and telling the women they are coming to find jobs in Europe. That was how it started at the beginning. And then discovering that, no, it wasn't really a job, but to go into prostitution. So that was how it started out. And we know also from studies in anthropology and in migration studies that when a certain group starts to import people from a specific area, because there are people who already know them and they know where to take them, you continue to have that group of people coming in. And that's the same thing that happened with the Edo women from Edo State. They were the first, and they continue to be the largest group being brought into Europe and exploited in prostitution. So that's one aspect of it. Then on the question of how do you, if I understand your question correctly, how do you bring together, how do you evaluate this issue of feminist approach and the question of recognition of the cultural context? Now, the question is not that of saying that we know that we know that there are different kinds of cultural practices. Some are very negative. And the question is not that of cultural relativism. That would be really dangerous, and it's not what we want. But it's a question of recognizing that when someone comes and tells you that she has been made to carry out certain practices due to a traditional practice that was imposed on her, you need to suspend judgment about that and listen and try to see things from her own perspective. That does not mean accepting or reinforcing that practice. It means trying to understand where she's coming from and how you can respond to her needs without denying what she has been through. Because the point of what happens is when you don't listen and you just say, oh, no, how can you believe in that kind of thing? I mean, it doesn't make sense. How can you say because somebody took some of your hair, they can influence it? That doesn't make anything. You're closing down the wall. You're putting up a wall, and that person will withdraw, and there's no way you can approach that person. So the question is, open up your own mind, suspend all judgments. You don't understand, admit you don't understand. If you're able to get someone that can help you to facilitate that understanding, to decode, you know, the question is decoding the cultural content. That is so important. So for instance, when we have any therapy, even if the victim speaks Italian very well, we insist that the person speaks in their own language, because what you express in your language, the way you're able to understand, it's not the same when you're speaking another language that you learned later on. It does not fully express that need. So starting from there, you open up your mind to understand where this person is coming from. You meet this person where she is. And that means understanding that she believes, it's not what you believe, it's what she believes, because the experience is hers. So what she believes, and then you try to understand how best you can use that belief and use other people who understand how to address those issues, how you can address it in the best way that would help her. And this, again, I would repeat, it does not mean, for instance, when we talk of female genital mutilation, where they will tell you cutting, I absolutely detest that word cutting. It's female genital mutilation. It is mutilation. It's not cutting. Don't tell me, oh, because that is their culture, so it's cutting and we should not touch it. No, I don't accept that. It's a universal thing. Human rights is universal. It's not a question of that's their cultural belief. And so we should try to do it in the least damaging thing. No, you cannot do it in the least damaging manner. It is damaging, period. And you need to eliminate it. If you have a wound, you're not going to try and, cover it and then you want to heal it. So you clean it out, you sew it up and you make sure it heals. And that's the same thing. So using that knowledge to assist the woman. And then if it's a case of a damaging practice, making her to understand that that practice should be eliminated and that it won't be of any use. So these are the various levels of it. I don't know if that has answered your question.
For me, absolutely. And I hope for those who ask this question. And I'm afraid we have to wrap up here because we're a little bit over time, unless there is some urgent questions. But also I invite everyone to some of the sandwiches and wraps, and we have some wine as well, and we can continue this conversation. You can ask any of the speakers with any burning questions. And thank you so much for spending this time with us today and those who are still online. And let's thank all the presenters and the press club for giving us opportunity to use their space. Thank you very much.